Today we're going to talk about why I believe in Jesus. Why I believe in Jesus. You see the picture of the guy? He's like a detective, right? And let me ask y'all this morning. Who is your favorite detective in movies or TV? Think about that. Your favorite detective in movies or TV. Anybody remember this guy? What's his name? Magnum P.I. I forgot him already. I know all the girls were crazy about him, right? Back then when he was had this TV show, everybody was crazy. All the girls were, right? How about this guy? Anybody remember him? Dirty Harry, right?
I like him.
Yeah. How about this girl? You remember her?
Nee.
Olivia Benson. Or how about her in the movie? She came out in the movie. Clarice Starling from Silence of the Lambs. That's a crazy movie. Now this is one of my favorites, detective. Beretta, yeah. No, Columbo. Beretta though was the one that came out with the bird, right?
Oh yeah.
He had the bird. That was Beretta. Yeah, that was a good show though too.
Yeah.
Right, remember him? Beretta as a young actor. What show did he come out in? Little Beaver? Okay, yeah, when he was young, right? And then he came out, he was a big star, right? I love Columbo. I love this one. This is a good one. Anybody remember this one? Oh, sorry, too much. This one, Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes, remember him?
Yeah.
Okay, now I got one that nobody's gonna know her name. Nobody knows this one. Anybody know who that is?
Yay!
Lon! Who is that, Lon? Is that Velma from Scooby-Doo? That's Velma Dinkley from Scooby-Doo. She's a detective as well, right, in the Scooby-Doo movies. And she's usually the one that figures out the cases, right, when they're trying to solve a case. It's Velma. Lot knew that one, right?
Yeah.
Well, what is the job of a detective, right? This is their job. This is what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to analyze a crime scene. They're supposed to interview witnesses, track suspects, and study all the facts, right? And that's what we are doing in this sermon series, right? The Case for Christianity. We're looking at all the crime scene. There was a crime. Jesus was murdered, right? It's a cold case. You know, it happened so long ago, and say we're trying to figure out what happened. Is it real? Did it really happen? And what were the facts all about? You know, so we're trying to study all the facts about it. This is why we're in this sermon series. What happened, right? There's a guy who recently wrote a book. This is his book. It's called Cold Case Christianity. J. Warner Wallace. I heard about it. I was listening to the Christian radio station. And he is in Los Angeles County homicide detective and a former atheist. He's a former atheist, right? But he became a believer because he started using what he knows as a homicide detective in order to solve a homicide. They got to look at all the facts and everything, right? But he started looking into Christianity, using all his skills, everything that he knows, right? And he believed, what he found out is that Jesus is real, right? He was a former atheist, but he became a believer, and he wrote this book. Right, entitled The Cold Case Christianity. So it is a very good book, J. Warner Wallace. I'm not trying to push it. I don't get paid for pushing this book or anything, right? But think about it. In the case of Jesus, there's no forensic evidence. And by that I mean there's no tire tracks. There's no DNA. There's no chemicals that they were looking at. There's no dental records, right, of Jesus. Right? There's no fingerprints. There's no bullets or weapons, right, that we have that we can take a look at today. And there's no photographs. We don't have a picture of Jesus the way he really looks, right? We don't know what he really looks. And J. Warner Wallace took all the stuff that he knows about being a detective and was trying to figure out, is Jesus really real? And he found out that he is real, and he's trying to help us, to equip us. Because you and I, as believers today in the 21st century, we have to be ready to give an answer. When somebody tells us, well, why do you believe in that? Isn't that a fairy tale? We need to say, no. I believe in Jesus because of this. I believe in Jesus because of that, right? And that's what we're going to take a look at this morning. Why can we believe in Jesus? Why do I believe in Jesus, right? Some people, you've heard some people say this. I'm sure you have. Some people say, well, Jesus was just a good person. He was a good moral teacher. But he was not the Son of God. He can't be God. There is no God. That's what some people say, right? Some of your friends may have said that. Some of your relatives, college professors, politicians, celebrities, and even some religious leaders. There's some religious leaders who say that too.
Like the
How can
Muslims?
they be huh?
Like the Muslims?
Well, yeah, but even Christian religious leaders. That seems crazy, doesn't it? But we're seeing that. We're seeing that's happening even today, right? Where even some Christian believers, they don't believe the Bible. And it's like, how in the world can you call yourself a Christian and not believe in the Bible? How in the world can you call yourself a Christian and not believe in Jesus, right? Think about this. When you read about what Jesus said in the Bible, right? You quickly discover that there's a problem with this a good moral teacher concept. Let's take a look at that for a second real quick, right? Think about this. Jesus made some outrageous claims in the Bible. He claimed to be the Son of God. Jesus said, I am the Son of God, right? He claimed to be equal with God. He claimed to have the power to forgive sins. And he claimed that he would someday judge the world. And he claimed that he had power over death. Think about that. This is the problem, right? A man who is merely a man and makes these kinds of claims about himself cannot be considered a good moral teacher. He's either crazy or he's a liar. But you cannot call him a good teacher, right? Somebody who says, I'm God, I'm equal with God. If it's not true. If it's not true, then he was either crazy or a liar, right? You cannot call him a good moral teacher. C.S. Lewis, I don't know if you've heard about him. He wrote a book called Mere Christianity. If you have not read it, you should read it, right? Mere Christianity. And this is what he said. He said about Jesus, he said, you can call him a fool, you can call him a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord. The world mostly does the first two, right? When it comes to believe about Jesus, right, there's only three possibilities that you can take. When it comes to Jesus, this is it. There's no other way what you can think about Jesus. Nobody can dispute that he was a real person. He existed. We know that. He was a real person. And so what? Well, by all the claims that he made, these are the only three things that you can think about him. He was either a liar, he was a lunatic, or he really is the Son of God. He really is the Son of God. Think about that. If he was a liar, he on purpose deceived people into following him. If he was a lunatic, he was a paranoid schizophrenic with visions of grandeur. Anybody who calls himself God, you're crazy. If I all of a sudden started coming and telling you, I'm God, take him to the loony farm, right? He's crazy. There's something wrong with him, right? But Jesus is the Son of God, right? These are the only options that we have. Which one do you choose, right? Point number one I want to take a look at this morning is that Jesus is the fulfillment of Old Testament prophecies. Think about this for a second. The writers of the Old Testament predicted the coming of the Messiah hundreds of years before Jesus was born. In what city was he born?
Bethlehem.
Bethlehem. Don't forget, right? He was born in Bethlehem, right? And what city did he die in?
Galilee? I don't know.
Jerusalem. Well, we got to go to Sunday school. We got to go back to Sunday school, right? But think about this. The writers of the Old Testament, hundreds of years before Jesus was ever born in Bethlehem, right? They predicted this. They predicted specific things about his life. They predicted in what city he was going to be born, who his ancestors would be, how he would die. They predicted events in his life that were going to take place, and how he would react in certain situations, and how people would react to him. All this was said hundreds of years before that, right? Think about this. When the Bible, there's 60 major Old Testament prophecies, 60, that talks about a Messiah. A Messiah, right? And guess what? Jesus fulfilled each one. Yeah, but what if Jesus deliberately staged events in his life to appear to be prophetic fulfillments? A skeptic would say, right? A skeptic would say, he just made it look like he fulfilled these prophecies, right? Take a look at this example. The prophecy that states that the Messiah will ride triumphantly into Jerusalem on a donkey. You've heard that, right? Some people say, well, Jesus faked it, man. He just went out and rented a donkey and took lessons on riding donkeys. That's all that happened. It was not something that he fulfilled from hundreds of years in the past, right? Well, how about this one? The prophecy of his death on the cross. So Jesus was crazy. He tried to fulfill prophecy by killing himself, right? Letting them people kill him on the cross. That's crazy. That's insane, right? Or what about the prophecies that says that he was to be betrayed by 30 pieces of silver? That was written hundreds of years before it actually happened. Or how about the prophecy that he would be of the line of David? Or how about that no bones would be broken while he was on the cross? What about that men would gamble for his clothes after his death? That was written hundreds of years before. And then it happened. Then it happened. A skeptic would say, yeah, but what if the writers of the Gospels made up all these things? They lied to make it look like Jesus was the Messiah. A skeptic would say, right? Well, think about this. If Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all became millionaires from royalties from writing the Bible, right, from writing the Gospels, then we could say, okay, maybe they lied about it, right? But is that what happened? They didn't become celebrities. They did not become rich because of writing the Gospels. You know what happened to them? They became wanted men. Did you know that Matthew was axed to death in Ethiopia? They killed him with an axe. Got an axe. Wow. Killed him to death, right? Mark was dragged to his death in Alexandria. Luke was hanged on an olive tree in Greece. And John the Apostle was the only one to die of natural causes. But did you know that John the Apostle was at one time thrown into boiling oil? Did you know that? For being a believer, for just believing in Jesus, right? He was exiled to the island of Patmos. And I find it very difficult to believe that these men would lie so that they could be put to death. Think about that. Would you lie? And if you knew somebody was going to kill you, said, no, I'll tell the truth, right? But a skeptic would say, yeah, but what if it was just an honest coincidence, all these things happening, of Jesus fulfilling these prophecies, right? Maybe there has to be other people who have fulfilled biblical prophecy by coincidence. Is that possible? It's not possible. It is not possible. Think about this. In the Bible, I said there were 60 prophecies about the Messiah. Did you know that there are 322 prophecies about Jesus himself? 322 prophecies. Think about that. And many of these prophecies have already been fulfilled in the New Testament. That Jesus fulfilled them. 322. That's a lot, right? Some of you might say, nah, you know what? That's not so bad. 322, nah. But let me tell you this. If only 8 prophecies were fulfilled, do you know what the likelihood of that happening? Somebody fulfilling 8, only 8, not 322, but 8 prophecies of something that happened hundreds of years ago. The likelihood of that happening is 1 in 10 to the 17th power. That's a 1 with 17 zeros behind it. The probability of that happening. You might say 1 in 100. 1 in every 100 people might do it. 1 in a million. 1 in 17 zeros. What number is that? I don't know. Quadrillion, quintillion. I stopped counting after a million, right? Billion. I don't know. Trillion. I don't know with the numbers after that, right? But that's a lot of zeros. And the chances of somebody fulfilling prophecy is just 8 prophecies is just crazy, right? Let me explain it this way. Let me give you an example. Let me give you a little illustration here, right? One way to understand this, right, is to think about this. If you have a quintillion, I don't even know how much that is, right? A quintillion chocolate chip cookies. You know how many quintillion chocolate chip cookies that is? How much a quintillion is? If you take chocolate chip cookies and you fill the entire United States from California to New York, you take chocolate chip cookies and cover the entire landmass from California to New York 2 feet deep, and you fill it all up, you get a quintillion chocolate chip cookies. Now think about this. You go and you get 1 cookie out of this quintillion cookies, chocolate chip cookies, right? And you take off all the chocolate chips. Take off all the chocolate chips. And then you throw that chipless cookie, you throw it in the mix again, and you shake up the whole United States, and then you put a blindfold on. and you start walking from California to New York, and then just randomly, as you're walking, you just stop somewhere, anywhere, randomly, you just stop and pick up a cookie. What are the chances that you're going to pick up the chipless cookie? That's one to the, that's a 10 to the 17th power. The chances of you doing that is crazy. That is insane. That does not happen, right? 10 to the 17th power. That is unthinkable. That is what that's the chances of one person just fulfilling 8 prophecies in the Bible. And what did I say? Jesus fulfilled 322 prophecies, and 29 of them in one day. Now that is a fact. Right? I believe in Jesus because he fulfilled Old Testament prophecy. That's point number 1. Point number 2. Jesus was raised from the dead. Now let me make this very clear, okay? When I say Jesus was raised from the dead, I don't mean in a spiritual sense. I don't mean in an allegorical sense, right? That it was just a fake, right? I mean Jesus was raised from the dead in the most literal sense of the word. Think about that. His human body was dead, completely lifeless. His heart stopped beating. The blood in his veins stopped flowing, and he stopped breathing. He was dead as dead could be. He was deader than dead. He was dead. Jesus was dead. Then 3 days in the tomb, right? After 3 days, his heart started beating again. Think about this. His lungs filled with air again. His eyes opened, and he was once again alive. That's what the Bible teaches. And that's what Christians have been saying for over 2,000 years, that Jesus was dead and he is alive. But a skeptic would say, yeah, well, what if Jesus really didn't die on the cross, right? Well, you've heard of some of the theories, right? One theory is it's the swoon theory, that Jesus just passed out. He didn't really die. He passed out, right? To think about this, this is what they say. Oh, he wasn't dead. The Roman soldiers only thought he was dead. And they buried him. And in the night, in the middle of the night, in the coolness of the tomb, Jesus woke up and he rolled away the stone that was covering the tomb. And he claimed to his followers, I came back from the dead. He said, but he was just asleep. He fainted. Think about this. Jesus was beaten brutally. He couldn't even walk. How can he roll away a stone, right? He was beaten so bad, right? This swoon theory does not work for one simple reason. People saw him die. People, eyewitnesses were there. Remember, the soldier even stabbed him on the side to say, he's dead. He was dead. Yeah, but a skeptic would say, well, the resurrection stories are really just legends that developed years after the death of Christ, right? And legends do come about. Anybody know this guy, St. George? He was a real person, right? But everybody says that he killed the dragon because his dragon had a little town captive, and he was making them give him food, or else he would kill their children, right? And St. George, who was a real believer, right? They said, oh, he was such a good person that he even killed that dragon to help save the people. Those are legends, right? And it doesn't happen, right? Think about this. In the case of Jesus, his followers affirmed everything from the very beginning, that he had died and he was raised from the dead. In 1 Corinthians, which Paul wrote in 56 AD, remember, Jesus died in 33 AD. 23 years later, Paul writes 1 Corinthians, 56 AD. And he tells them this creed. He tells them, I preach this among you. Listen to this, Paul is telling them. For what I received, I passed on to you as of first importance, that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures. Jesus died. He was really dead, right? Look at verse 4. That he was buried and that he was raised on the third day according to the Scriptures. 1 Corinthians 15, 5 and 6. Take a look at that. And that he appeared to Cephas. Who's Cephas? Peter. He appeared to Peter and then to the 12. They saw him. And then Paul continues in verse 6. He says, after that, he appeared to more than 500 of the brothers and sisters at the same time, most of whom are still living. He said, they're eyewitnesses. They're alive right now. You can go question them. You can go ask them. He said, some of them have died. Some of them have fallen asleep. Some of them have died, but there's a lot of them are still alive. You can go and find out. Ask them for yourselves. They saw Jesus with their own eyes. Christianity has always taught that Jesus was raised physically from the dead. It wasn't an idea that developed later over time. This was what they immediately happened after Jesus was resurrected from the dead, right? And we have the testimony of credible eyewitnesses who can tell you what really happened. They were there. But a skeptic would say, but it was not a real resurrection, it was a spiritual resurrection, right? Well, like I said earlier, there are some liberal theologians who believe that. Look at this one guy. He's an Episcopal bishop, an Episcopal pastor. And this is what he says. He really believes it. He says, the miracles of physical resuscitation, John Spong, the angels who roll away stones away from tombs, the bodies that appear out of nothing and disappear into thin air must be dismissed for the developed legends that they are. He really believes this. He really believes this. It comes down to this. Either you can believe the eyewitness testimony or you can't. I believe that Jesus is who he claimed to be because he was raised from the dead and he conquered death. I believe the eyewitness testimony of those who saw him. This means that you and I, that we can overcome death too. Death has no victory over us. It didn't have victory over Jesus. It has no victory over us, right? Death has lost its sting. There's a story of a man and his little son. They were driving in a car. They're driving down the road, right? All of a sudden, they see a bee comes into the car, and his son is allergic, highly allergic to these things, right? And so the man is driving, right? And the son starts freaking out. Dad, there's a bee. There's a bee. He's going to get me. And the dad doesn't know what to do. So what he does is he catches the bee with his hand. And he squeezes it, and he's trying to kill the bee, right? And the son's like, oh, okay, great. That's good. And the man opens his hand, and the bee flies out. It didn't die. It's still there. And the son starts panicking. Dad, I'm allergic to it. You got to do something, Dad. You got to do something. And then the dad tells his son, calm down. Everything's all right. But Dad, the bee's still flying around. Dad, the bee's still flying around. And the dad says, look at my hand. And he shows him his hand. He opens his hand, and he shows the little boy that the stinger is in his hand. He said, the bee stung me, and the stinger stayed here. The bee can't hurt you. The stinger is gone. Death has no sting over us no more. We should not fear death as believers, as Christians, right? There's no more sting. If we die, we go to be with Jesus, right? It's a celebration. It's something good. And a lot of people were so afraid of death and dying because it's an unknown thing. But Jesus said, I have conquered death and I was raised from the dead. And so will we. We will live forever. We should not be afraid of death. The third point, the radical transformation of Jesus' disciples makes me believe that Jesus is the Son of God. What do I mean by that, right? Well, think about this. When Jesus died, he died alone. Nearly all of his disciples abandoned him. Judas betrayed him. Peter denied him. And the rest deserted him except for one. Who was that one? There was one apostle that stayed.
John,
the apostle John, whom Jesus called the beloved, the one that I love, right? Think about that. All the apostles were cowards. Why were they cowards? Why did they run? Because they said, I'm next. They arrested Jesus. I'm next, man. I'm getting out of here. And they ran. But think about this. That something happened. Something happened to the apostles that changed everything, right? They were cowards, but then all of a sudden their cowardice disappeared. They began courageously speaking of the name of Jesus and telling everybody in public places about Jesus, the one that they saw alive, right? Signs and wonders began to follow them wherever they went. Suddenly, this group of men who were afraid of their own shadow could not be stopped. Think about this. You could beat them, but they still preached. You could imprison them, and they still preached. You could torture them, and they still preached. Nobody could stop them, right? The only way that anybody could stop them, the only way that the authorities were able to stop them was to kill them. And they did. All the apostles were killed except one. Who was that one?
John.
John the Apostle. Think about this. The beloved, the one that Jesus loved, right? He was the one that did not turn his back on Jesus. And all the others were killed except him. Is there a connection there? I don't know, right? I don't know. But remember earlier that I mentioned what happened to Matthew, Mark, and Luke, right? But what about the other apostles? Did you know that Philip was thrown in jail, beaten, and crucified in 54 AD? Matthias was stoned and beheaded in Jerusalem. Andrew was crucified in Edessa. Peter was crucified upside down in Rome. You've heard of that, right? During the persecution of Nero. Bartholomew was beaten and crucified in India. They were out preaching Jesus, right? Simon the Zealot was crucified in 74 AD. And Thomas, remember him, doubting Thomas? He was killed by a sword in Parthia. What drove these men to be willing to die for the name of Jesus? Could it have been that they got all together and said, let's make this up. Let's make up this lie that we saw Jesus, right? They said, hey, you guys, let's keep this joke going, right? Even if it kills us. I don't think so, right? That did not happen. What are you going to do? Will you abandon Jesus? Or will you stand for him? What are you going to do? I'm finishing up already. There's this man named Polycarp. Polycarp, he was born in AD 69. Jesus died in 33. He was born in 69. He was a pastor, the bishop of Smyrna. The book of Revelation talks about this, right? The bishop of Smyrna. He was an apostolic father. But apostolic father means we have the apostles, and then the believers right after the apostles, we call them the apostolic fathers. And after the apostolic fathers, then we have the church fathers. This is when the early church started coming out. I love this kind of stuff, right? Knowing there's the apostles, the apostolic fathers, and then the church fathers, and then we have the church after that, which is, we're a part of that, right? But Polycarp is part of the apostolic fathers. That means did you know that he was a disciple of the Apostle John? He was a disciple of the Apostle John. He learned directly from John all the things about Jesus, right? When he was arrested for refusing to worship the Roman emperor, they said, you need to burn incense to the Roman emperor. He said, I will not. We're going to arrest you, Polycarp. We're going to arrest you. He said, arrest me, but I won't do it. He said, okay. They arrested him. They bring him before the Roman court, and they said, okay, Polycarp, you got to worship the Roman governor. And he said, I won't. He said, you got to recant Jesus. You got to say that you don't put your faith and trust in him anymore. You got to say, I don't believe in him anymore. And he said, I can't. And this is his famous quote. He said, 86 years I have served Jesus, and he has done me no wrong. My dad just turned 86 this past week, right? And Polycarp said, 86 years have I served, and he has done me no wrong. How then can I blaspheme my King and Savior? And he was burned at the stake. Think about that. The disciples, if they didn't physically see Jesus rise from the dead, they would have known that it was a lie. They would have known. But they knew the truth. They knew what had happened. And they were willing to die for that truth. And Jesus is still today radically transforming his disciples. I've experienced it. You have too. Think about that. When I look at who I used to be and who I am today, the change happened in me because of my relationship with Jesus. There's evidence to support that Jesus fulfilled Old Testament prophecy. There's evidence to support that Jesus was physically raised from the dead. And the bottom line is, why we believe in Jesus? Because he is the Son of God. He is who he says he is. Right?